What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So we've talked quite a bit about Sony raising prices pretty much across the board this generation on the console side with the PlayStation 5, especially for the hardware itself. Well, now there's a new program that's actually gained quite a bit of popularity in the first month or so that it's been around. And in fact, it actually brings back quite a bit of nostalgia for me even, and we'll go over that here today. Also, we are going to be talking about Monster Hunter's massive debut week in Japan, not only selling a ton of copies, but also a ton of PlayStation 5 consoles. And we had a showcase yesterday from Nacon that actually showed off some pretty big surprises, one of which I'm very excited about because it's a standalone follow-up to, well, the latest RoboCop game. So if you guys enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton. And if new here to the Spawnwave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And of course, members for the channel do get Newswave early. If you would like to learn more about that, click the join button or the link in the description down below. And we're going to start today with Nintendo Switch Online, as we had a couple of titles get announced last night, these being Game Boy titles, which we can see the trailer here for it. And the first one up, Donkey Kong 94. I mean, it's just called Donkey Kong. Came out in 1994 though, but most people refer to it, I guess, as just Donkey Kong 94. And I mean, you can see some of it here, obviously playing off of the original Donkey Kong game from way back in the day, but they added a bunch of extra elements into it. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is like the first game, or one of the first games that used the Super Game Boy enhancements, which is pretty cool. And then Mario's Picross, which I'm not really a Picross person. I'm sure there are people out there who are excited to see that one too, playing through these different picture puzzles, as they say, but the one that I'd probably be going to right away would be Donkey Kong 94. So just a fun thing, I guess, for them to throw out there. Nothing that's like earth-shattering and everything for like a Mario Day event, but still, it's always nice just to have random NSO games drop on a Thursday night, in this case, a couple of Game Boy games. Also, we did have the titles revealed for Amazon Prime Gaming, which many people don't even realize they have access to, so I'd like to remind those of you out there with the Amazon Prime subscription, there are actually plenty of games that are just there to be claimed, even on GOG, which are DRM free. So we can see the list here. Now, the games that are available right now include Saints Row the Third Remastered on GOG, Mafia 2 Definitive Edition on GOG, Crime Boss, Rockay City, that's on the Epic Games Store. And going from there, I'm just going to point out a few as we go. March 13th, Siberia, The World Before on GOG. There's Beholder 3. That's through Amazon Games app. I don't really have much experience with that one. Let me know if you're an Amazon Games app person. March 20th, though, Wolfenstein The Old Blood. That's on Xbox. So you don't really see console ones given out here very often, and PC through that Microsoft Store code. You also have Legacy of Kain Defiance through GOG. That's a good one there. March 27th, they have the Forgotten City on that Amazon Games app. Deus Ex Invisible War on GOG. Session, that's the skate simulator game. That's on Epic Games Store. Let's Build a Zoo on Epic Games Store. Game Deck Definitive Edition on GOG. So, as I mentioned, these are ones that are just kind of thrown in there for your Amazon Prime Gaming or just Prime subscription. You may as well go through and claim them and use GOG to just get them DRM free, and keep an eye out on the page as they go live so you can at least click that claim button. Oh, and today I wanted to give a shout out to this video sponsor, Ninja 5.0. I did a video checking out the game in depth recently, and having a game like this get an official release is a big deal since the Game Boy Advance cartridge still going for hundreds of dollars online even without the box. It was developed by Hudson Soft and published by Konami, fitting in nicely to that era of high-quality 2D side-scrollers on the GBA. You play as Joe Isugi, a ninja detective, armed with your sword, some magic, and a crazy grappling hook. You navigate a series of platforming levels, saving hostages, and eventually taking down a big boss. A lot of work also went into the museum, letting you browse a bunch of older artwork, sounds, and more to relive the launch experience in the early 2000s. Ninja 5.0 is available now on PS4, PS5, Nintendo Switch, and PC. You can learn more about it at the link in the description below. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with this new PlayStation program that's working to get more and more people PlayStation 5 consoles and trying to get around that big upfront cost that has only grown throughout the generation, which is completely different from what we usually expect to see as the generation goes on. Typically, prices around consoles drop, and sometimes significantly so. But it's different times now with inflation and everything else. So now, how do we get more people the system? Well, what if you just rented the system to them? Well, this is something that actually started up in Japan about a month or so ago, was very popular there, which We'll talk about that a bit more in the media creates the Famitsu sales charts with Monster Hunter and why that would actually be the case. But here it looks like we see a rental program going on in the UK. This we can see posted up by VGC, where they say the leasing plan, which has been branded Flex, it's a partnership between PlayStation and leasing firm Raylo. Players can choose to lease standard or digital PS5 consoles, PlayStation Portal handhelds, the PSVR 2 headset even, or a PS5 Pro on a rolling monthly contract. You can also sign up for 12-month, 24-month, or 36-month terms for lower monthly payments. So like we can see VGC did have like some of the pricing here. So for example, we'll pick out one here, PS5 standard. All right, so if you have like the monthly fee, which you can cancel at any time, it's like what, 33 or 34 US dollars there after you convert it over. So, I mean, the PS5 Pro obviously much more expensive there. And I see some people going, why would you do this exactly? Well, I will say it's probably better to save up and just buy it outright so you just always have it. This is leasing. That means that when your term is up, you're supposed to then give it back to the company. They do say you can negotiate with them and maybe buy it outright. So at that point, maybe they would give you some sort of deal on it. But in this case, it makes sense for a couple of things. I mean, I would look at this as, hey, if you're trying to hold a tournament and you only have so many and you need another like 3 or 4 PlayStation 5 consoles maybe to hold the event, even over the course of like a week or a weekend, this isn't a bad solution, right? Because you go there, you'd be able to pick the system up and then bring it back a few weeks later, a month later, and that'd be it, rather than have to go out and buy 3 or 4 PlayStation 5 consoles outright for a week-long event that maybe happens a couple of times a year at most. Otherwise, though, if you look at like the 36-month contract per month, as they say, if you add all of that up for a PS5 standard, you usually come out to a bit more, I think, than the PS5 console itself is what like people were saying with the math and how it was coming out in that region, specifically in the UK. So, I mean, that to me, it's very popular because clearly there's no big upfront cost. I will say for a PSVR 2, might make sense as well if you have a PS5, but you don't want to really, I mean, commit to that kind of upfront cost because you just want to try the PSVR 2 out. In that instance, it was like 20 some odd dollars for a month. You'll know if you want to play PSVR 2 after a month of trying it out. Probably after, to be honest, the first couple times to see if you get sick or not. So to me, this would make more sense for one-off events that cancel any time as opposed to leasing it for potentially 36 months at that point. Or hey, if a big release hits and you're like, I just want to play that one game, I mean, this isn't a bad way to do it. Rent it there, then I guess rent it through, we have like GameFly, but rent it the game through another subscription service or one-time fee thing, and there you go. You can play through the game in a couple of weeks, return everything, and just move on with your life at that point. But again, I think it should be very specific, but it seems like this is very, very popular, as not only in Japan have they pretty much gone through their initial stock of rentals, it's happening here as well in the UK. So yeah, I mean, the PS5, PlayStation in general, their brand is very, very strong right now. So even something like this where you say, hey, it's $30 right now, you can go home with a PlayStation 5. I mean, yeah, there's many people who show up for that, but do they all come back? That's another good question, because I'm sure that's something that many of these companies have to deal with quite frequently. Systems just never returning. So I mentioned there was some nostalgia here, and I'll actually talk a bit more about that for the poll question later, because I did ask people if they've ever actually rented a console before. Next up, let's talk about Monster Hunter Wilds. We already know that it did 8 million copies in less than a week. And now we're starting to see some of the Japan sales charts giving us a look at physical copies that sold along with PlayStation 5 consoles that we would expect to see at least a decent jump with a popular title like this in the region. And indeed, we see that here. This is over on Install Base Forum, who's quoting the Famitsu sales charts. And it looks like Monster Hunter Wilds did top the charts, 601,179 copies. Now, I will say, Monster Hunter World, that was north of 1 million. It's like 1.2 million. So this is technically about half of that here. But as we know, Sony has been moving more and more to the digital side of things. And it wouldn't shock me if maybe the other half legitimately is just in digital sales. Very, very possible, especially on PC, where we already saw what those numbers looked like. Now, from there, Yu-Gi-Oh! Early Days Collection, which has a ridiculously long tagline here because it seems to quote every single game that's in the pack. That's 49,862. I'm sure Konami's actually pretty happy with that. Wizardry, the 5 Ordeals, It's an RPG from GameSpark Publishing, $11,299. Then we have Super Mario Party Jamboree, Donkey Kong Country Returns HD. By the way, that sold over 200,000 copies in Japan alone, which is probably more than it should at the price point and the kind of how it should have. Anyway, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, of course, Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii, that's on the PS5 and then the PS4 version. Then we have Okeo Niemu Full Production Limited Edition, 5,939 copies, and then Minecraft around at the top 10. Moving over to the hardware, the PS5 did indeed see a pretty significant jump, about 8 times from the previous week, 108,000 units. That brings its total up to, interesting, 6,666,457 units. The Switch was behind it, 45,189, the Xbox Series, 721, and the PS4 somehow still sold 20 units. Now, interestingly enough, the PS5 Pro did manage to sell over 7,500 consoles in that week, with the PS5 being obviously the most sold, 75,000, and then the digital edition, 26,362. Now, the thing with the PS5 is, of course, it's very expensive in Japan. I think if you do the conversion rate and stuff, it's still $550 for the PlayStation 5 in Japan. The PS5 Pro, that's without the disc drive, over $800. So it's not exactly the easiest thing in the world, once again, to buy up front, in this case for a PS5 or PS5 Pro, to go along with Monster Hunter Wilds. And if you consider that versus the Switch, that's about half the price of the PS5, roughly half the price. It's actually pretty impressive to see the PS5 be able to pull off over 100,000 systems selling, even though all of this is technically below what the PS4 was selling at the time that Monster Hunter World came out, along with physical copies. But everything is just more expensive between not only the game, but also the consoles, with Sony and even presenting an $800 system in the region. Basically, yes, Monster Hunter is very, very popular in Japan. And as we've seen by the numbers, it's just pretty much popular everywhere at this point. It has hit that worldwide mainstream status, which we saw World and Rise hit. Looks like Wilds is on track to probably break even all of that. Next up, let's talk about the showcase that happened yesterday with the Nacon Connect. They actually showed up and announced quite a few titles and a couple of surprises. There were a few in there that I was definitely not expecting to see, but let's start from the top here and go through kind of quick because, as I mentioned, they actually had quite a few things here. So we'll start. That's with Cthulhu, the Cosmic Abyss. That's coming out 2026. The Fading of Nicole Wilson. Then we had Edge of Memories. This is that follow-up, I believe, to Edge of Eternity. We've talked about this a few times already. And we have Raven's Watch, Ren Sport. This was like a simulation racing game. They also showed off Nacon's own steering wheel and pedals and stuff you can buy. The big one here that I was really excited for, RoboCop Rogue City Unfinished Business. So this is a standalone title. You don't need RoboCop Rogue City to pick this one up if you're interested in it. It's coming out summer 2025. And the thing that caught me off guard is it looks like they have flashback missions to where you'll be playing as Human Murphy. So not just RoboCop, but even before he became RoboCop. So that's kind of interesting. They showed it, and it clearly you weren't RoboCop at that point. So I'm curious how that'll kind of intertwine into the normal missions you'll be going on, how that'll all play into the story and how exactly it'll turn out. So really, really interested in that one. Then we have the Mound Omen of Cthulhu. That's 2025. Dragonkin, The Banished, that's out right now in early access on Steam. Test Drive Unlimited, they have their Season 3, and some of the updates include solo mode, which people seem really excited about, and they also, of course, have new cars and other features. That is dropping March 19th. We have The Occultist, Styx, Blades of Greed. So we've had a couple of Styx games already. I was not expecting this one. I mean, it's interesting to see a third game. I guess the other ones did well enough for them to decide to do a third one. And this is coming out fall 2025, so not too far off, coming out this year. Hell Is Us was the big game they closed out on. They showed a bunch of new gameplay. It's this third-person action-adventure title. We've seen quite a bit of it, I think, at this point, but still they had new gameplay to show. It, of course, coming out September 4th, 2025, and it looked interesting enough. I still think the big one coming away from that for me was RoboCop, because I really liked Rogue City when it came out. Really, really fun title. And I'm curious with this one, because it seems like they're leaning more into some of the story elements with those flashback missions, and I'm curious how they'll maybe differentiate between Alex Murphy and then RoboCop, of course. So you feel like they would play at least a little different in kind of that first-person shooting environment. But hey, not a bad show here from Nacon. Definitely a lot of cool stuff to look forward to. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about a new controller from Sony that at first I saw it, I was like, that's kind of out of left field, but then it sort of makes sense with what's coming up here in April, and that's Season 2 for The Last of Us series. And in this case, we have a new controller, and it does still kind of feel out of left field because you're not going to use the controller to like watch the series, but I guess still they're expecting, yeah, you're going to see more interest in The Last of Us games with Season 2 kicking off April 13th, but you can see it here. And I will say the design, I think looks pretty good. They say escape the infected with this limited edition controller featuring glossy trophy icons from both installments of The Last of Us. You can pre-order starting March 14th. It'll be available April 10th, and the price point is $84.99. So not like a cheap controller, but I mean, it's how it goes with some of these limited edition controllers, which I'm sure Last of Us fans have already decided that they're probably picking this up. And, you know, I will say they do like the front sort of blackish gray covers for the touchpad, and then the right and the left side of the controller, but it does wrap all the way around to the back. And I do like that L1, L2, R1, and R2 are then like contrasting colors there with them being all white. I mean, it looks good. It's not like a bad looking controller, and clearly Last of Us fans, I'm sure, are getting a kick out of this. It just seems kind of strange. I mean, it even says like Last of Us on the back. This feels like something that they would have done for any of the other releases, or a Last of Us Part 3 that now is in question. Like, it's in doubt that there will be a Last of Us Part 3 from what Neil Druckmann said, although I still kind of feel like he's being a bit coy there, especially because we're most likely going to see another popularity spike or just surge for the franchise with Season 2 hitting here next month. So we'll see with that. But for now, yes, you can get a new Last of Us controller that feels out of left field, but for fans, they're probably pretty happy about it. And before we go to the comment of the day, we'll take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, have you ever rented a game console before? 80% say no. I was expecting that, by the way. I don't really think game or console rental is very common anymore. And I'll say that because 20% say yes, and I feel like many of you remember the days of renting a Nintendo 64. In fact, I saw in the comments where some were like, yeah, we rented a Nintendo 64 because there was like a party that was happening maybe over the weekend, sleepover or something, and we went out, we rented the N64 from the rental store, and maybe we got a couple of movies and a couple of games, and we were set for the weekend. That's actually what I remember. I remember going out as my parents were having people over, and of course they have kids, and it's like, what do we do? Let's get them a Nintendo 64. You rent it for, I think, a week, and I'm trying to think of the pricing. I feel like you would get, I'm trying to think right now, picturing what we had when we were playing, because we had 3 controllers. So I feel like it was the Nintendo 64. I think you get like 2 controllers, 2 games or something, because we were allowed to pick out a couple games. I feel like it was in the 20s. I think it was like $25 to $30, somewhere in there. And you had it for 5 days. So, because we still had it after people left. I'd have a Nintendo 64 for 3. Big deal back then, by the way, if you were younger and you weren't out buying all this stuff, right? It's like, I get this system myself for a couple of days. So that's what I remember though. After that, don't remember renting game systems at all. It was just, for some reason, that N64 generation, maybe because it was 4 players, 4 controllers, it was the party system to get. And maybe some of these video game stores, which I think the rental store was called California Video, but it was common. They had it up there on the counter. It was like, hey, you can rent the console and pick some stuff out. And I'm sure they upsold parents and all kinds of stuff, but they weren't complaining because they had a distraction for the kids. And we weren't complaining because we had a bunch of controllers, Mario Party 2, GoldenEye, and it was a lot of fun back then. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day as you're seeing here. This is from Sonic, who says, the fact that you had to explain how to make the disk drive work makes me suddenly realize that we are way past the it just works era of technology. That's kind of the way that the consoles have really been popular, is you avoid any headache of drivers or configuration or setting things up or building a PC. You buy it, you take it out of the box, you plug in a couple of cables, you put your information in for your account, and that's it. Even back in the day, you skip all of that, you just put a cartridge or a disc in, and it would start up just like that, right? So we've kind of gotten further and further down the path of the systems, the consoles keep getting slightly more complicated every generation. And yes, you're right, the disk drive is becoming a complication. Just outright it is. The fact that it's something that you might have to just think about buying separately and add it in as that budget, and then also maybe figure out a place to put it, plug it in, register it with the system. It's like, is this something that people are going to continue dealing with, we'll say, in the next couple of generations? Or are they just gonna say, you know what, I'll go all digital because it's actually more convenient. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. If you missed yesterday's Newswave, I'll leave it up here in a card. Or maybe you wanted to hear Ryan and I talk about PlayStation for like 2.5 hours. Well, we had our latest episode of Click R3 go live yesterday, and I'll leave that right below. Thanks, guys, for watching. Have a great weekend. I'll see you back here Monday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time for Newswave.